So what was the mark of the beast then, if most of Revelation has already come to pass? And the beast has already been here, the Antichrist has already come, tribulation has already come upon us. Sometime around the first millennium, early first millennium, first century, third, second, fourth century, we're trying to figure it out, you know. The mark of the beast and the meaning of the word mark, teragma. So this is pretty much what the mark is in its original Greek. The word teragma. It basically means stamp or brand of some kind, but it has multiple meanings, such as a Roman imperial stamp, a seal that was stamped on documents with the name and date of the emperor. It could also refer to the emperor's head on coins. People say it's the mark of the Antichrist on the forehead or the right hand of the followers of the Antichrist. It's a brand on horses, a mark, a carved thing, a sculpture, graven work, or idolatrous image as well. There's various applications for the word teragma. In Revelation 13:17 it says, "And no one may buy or sell except one who has the teragma or name of the beast, or the number of his name." So his signature, his sign, his mark, his seal in forms of a stamp and or documentation, as we can see here from a Roman Latin standpoint, the Greek standpoint. Stamp or brand, teragma, mark. So when we're looking for the mark of the beast, people today tend to look to things like, you know, nanotechnology or some kind of, you know, the biochips, chips in the fingers. RFID is quite a popular one, isn't it? RFID chips, things being implanted into people's skin or within the mind. People said, you know, chip and pin was originally the mark of the beast as well. So any form of technology we see today is not the mark of the beast. So we're not encouraging anybody to take anything akin to something like a mark of the beast in a modern context. It's a thing called a libellus or a liber. I'm going to say libellus, I think that's how it's pronounced. And the plural is libelli. And in the Roman Empire, it was a brief document written on individual pages as opposed to scrolls or tablets, particularly official documents issued by governmental authorities. Nero to being the beast around, you know, the beasts from the 60 ADs up until the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. He was known for persecuting Christians pretty hardcore. Nero burning Christians. It was known as these Roman lamps that basically he would just set fire to Christians and let them burn all night, you know, and he was pretty ruthless when it came to the persecution of Christians. He was pretty brutal. He blamed the fires of Rome on the Christians as well. He was pretty hardcore against Christians and persecuted them pretty bad. It was brutal. He made statues of himself modeled after the sun gods. He modeled himself as a god. People were saying these would have been the teragmas or the marks, forcing, you know, the Christians to use his money to buy and sell things. No other money was legal tender, let's say, in Rome or within, you know, his empire. They were used during the reign of Emperor Decius, whose citizens to certify performance of required pagan sacrifices in order to demonstrate loyalty to the authorities of the Roman Empire. During later periods, libelli were issued as certificates of indulgence in which the confessors or martyrs interceded for apostate Christians. So, its Latin diminutive form is from liber, meaning book. We get the English word library from the same root. It literally means little book. Sometimes the word is used to describe what we call essays, tracts, pamphlets, or petitions. During the Decian persecution in the year 2050, in an attempt to promote traditional Roman pietas and unify the empire, the Emperor Decian decreed that everyone, excepting the Jews, must sacrifice and burn incense to gods in the presence of a magistrate, and obtain a signed document witnessed by the officials attesting to this. The libellus was the statement of the individual of his or her loyalty to the empire, the fact that they had rendered the required sacrifice, plus a request for the officials to countersign as witnesses. 46 such certificates have been published, all dating to the same year, 2050 AD. This coincides with the Decian persecution, and 4 libelli are found among the thousands of papyri and archaeological sites. Participating in pagan sacrifices was a sin for Christians and punished by excommunication, because the New Testament forbade Christians to participate in idol feasts. However, not participating made one liable to arrest by the Roman authorities. A warrant to arrest Christians was also found in the same place. This was basically a sign that you are, officially speaking, loyal to the Roman Empire, and therefore you are capable of buying and selling your goods within the empire. Basically, showing your allegiance to the beast system, Rome, the fifth beast, the empire, and therefore you now have permission to buy or sell. You use your hands to buy, and your thoughts and your minds are in line with the emperor's will. It means to have the mark on your hand and your forehead. In the early church, it was apostates who renounced their faith under the persecution by Roman authorities. So the term refers to those who have lapsed or fallen away from their faith, only to return to it later. It could be considered as the opposite concept of a martyr, who are those who prefer to accept suffering and death rather than deny their faith. So it originates in the Decian persecution of 250 AD, which requires all citizens of the Roman Empire to publicly sacrifice to traditional gods, which created unrest in the church. Christians who submitted to pressure and made public sacrifice were called lapsed or lapsi upon completion of sacrifice. Individuals received a certificate of sacrifice or a libellus, a legal document proving conformity to the Roman religion. It really shook up early Christian faith. Faith was severely tested here. It seems like there was a large body of Christians who gave in out of fear to the will of Rome and made those sacrifices, which put them in excommunication with the church at the time. And as a result, some leaders fled. Those who had burnt incense on the altar before the statues of the gods, from the Latin therifica, to burn incense, traitors or traitors. It was quite a horrible time, this 250 AD. A odd move was made by the beast. Christians, you have to make sacrifices to the gods, or we'll arrest you, will torture you, or you definitely won't have the correct documentation to be considered a Roman citizen, and therefore you can't actually, buy or sell here. Without this documentation, you were basically ostracized from society during this overhaul. Demanded universal sacrifice, ordering all inhabitants to sacrifice to the gods. Persecution varied in intensity across the empire. It was weakest in Gaul and Britain, where only the first edict was applied. The strongest was in the eastern provinces. Persecutory laws were notified by different emperors at different times, but Constantine and Licinius of Milan was traditionally marks the end of the persecution when Constantine took over, and this was obviously the start of the Byzantine. In the 250s, under the reign of Decius and Valerian, Roman subjects, including Christians, were compelled to sacrifice to Roman gods or face imprisonment and execution. In the Middle Ages, when this supposedly happened, 3 cataclysms that happened in the 1st century. First, you had in the 3rd century, the invasion of Rome by the barbarians, and utter destruction just coming upon everything, and a complete destruction of the Roman Empire and collapse. And then they had this break in time. And then there was another crisis in the 6th century, where it seems like it was the worst year on record. Everything was just terrible. It was awful. Famine, destruction, death, the sun being blotted out, the moon being blotted out, a mini ice age, complete total crisis, volcanoes going off everywhere, comets all over the place. And then it says in the 10th century, in 930, there was another mysterious collapse of Northern Europe, and of the Scandinavian cultures and the pagan cultures were all just completely annihilated, and a complete total conversion to Christianity took place. This doesn't make any sense, because we don't have the records don't align to these 3 events as being separate things. There's no overlap. It seems like they're all one event that happened at one time. Our architecture did not change during this 1,000-year period, when we're supposed to have 3 different types of architecture through different stages of antiquity. There you have antiquity, late antiquity, early Middle Ages, the 3rd, the 6th, and the 10th. All 3 collapses, and no advancement through each population that came out of each cataclysm in archaeological. Nothing, there was no change. Archaeologists who check the stratum find layers of each of these types of civilizations, and none exist. There are no layers upon layers of different civilizations out of 35,000 dig sites. 0 have this strata that should be there showing different layers of different time periods. It seems like they were actually all existing at the same time next to each other. Therefore, there is no separation of 700 years between these times or events. It all happened at the same time. Paul, and how in the 9th century there's a huge revival in Asia of Paulianism type Christianity. They are persecuted by rulers from Constantinople, yet they are non-Trinitarian. Paulicians do not regard Jesus as God. They believe, like 1 Corinthians, like 1st century Christians, that Jesus is the Son of God 700 years before them. So this is the 8th, 9th century, early Middle Ages when this supposedly happened. Yet there's no evidence. When Paul's talking about traveling through Asia Minor of Europe and obviously spreading the gospel, and there's no evidence in the 1st century that Asia had anyone called Paul walking around spreading anything. You only hear of a Christian overhaul of Asia in the 8th, 9th century. So there's a 700-year gap there between when Paul was supposedly in Asia and when Asia supposedly actually got Christianity, because there likely isn't a gap. It happened in antiquity, not the early Middle Ages. We've been given these dates, 303, 311 is when Constantinople, when the Christendom and the Christian religion became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire. And then obviously we're talking about dates like 2050s when the persecution of Christians was at its full peak. We're talking about 70 AD when the temple was destroyed. We've got a lot of different dates here. Lots of evidence that Constantinople was established in the 1st century, not the 3rd. Collapse of Rome. But basically none of the dates are accurate. Not at all. There's a 300-year gap before we have Christian basilica-styled temples being created. We have Rome, Constantinople and Jerusalem, and there's no changes whatsoever in architectural style after Christendom's established. There are no temples being created by Christians for 300 years. The first get created till the 3rd century. And only then in the 3rd century, sorry, this is 400 years, only then in the 3rd century do temples get built for Christians, and they're built in the same architectural style as antiquity as the 1st century. Why would Christians suddenly start building in antiquity style 400 years later? Is it perhaps there wasn't actually a 400-year gap and it did all happen in the 1st century? Most of the manipulation was taking place in the 1st millennium, the first 1,000 years, and it seems like the most cataclysms we have on record were around that time. Now there were cataclysms as well. There was the plague of the 13th century. Then if you look into that record and you look at the explanations of the 13th century plagues, they're identical to the events that took place in the 6th century around 536 AD. It's quite a similar parallel account. Is it perhaps talking about the exact same event, just with a 700 years difference, 800 years difference? We have to understand, this seems to be what's missing. 700 years are missing. So we're not actually in like the year 2024, we're more likely in the year 1400. So the millennial reign of Christ happened around 70 AD, perhaps ended around 1070 AD, roughly, and we are now in the last 300, 200 years of the little season of Satan before the final Gog-Magog war. Most people still trust the historical record that they have assumed is true, but the archaeological evidence is showing that these dates are erroneous and nonsensical and do not make any sense whatsoever. They've just kind of been given these dates because it has to somehow make it fit with Scaligerian chronology, which was created in the 1600s by the Scaliger brothers, who are working for the Jesuits. It's all kind of very, very dodgy when you actually look into where our official timeline comes from. And this means, the early church fathers and their true timings of when they all actually happened. The temple was destroyed in 70 AD, about 40 years after Christ's ascension and his resurrection and his ascension after Pentecost. And then we don't know how long it took then to establish the millennial kingdom, if it was instant or if it was more of maybe there was like a 50-year period where things were kind of adapting and molding and becoming like the millennial kingdom of Christ. Because don't forget, if there was such a horrific disaster, which basically wiped out all of antiquity into 3 separate events over 800 years, that was one giant cataclysmic event that affected all the earth. And as he explains, including China and the Mayan cultures were all eradicated around the same time. The Norse pagan cultures everywhere was just fully reset around this early millennial period. We don't know exactly how long it took for the tribulation to fully come to an end, or for at least the recuperation of those who went through the tribulation to survive, the survivors coming out from their dwellings or the shelters or whatever happened. It's all up in the air right now. And it seems like maybe tribulation was maybe a 3-hit event that happened in a short period of time, and then an establishment, a new rebuilding effort took place. Everything was buried. This is when all the Roman architecture, which is somehow underground by like 50 foot, 30 foot, 20 foot, 10 foot, varying heights all over the earth, is this earth-wide architecture we find everywhere of pillars and, like I said, archways and all these type of things. That may have been when it was all destroyed, and when it was all covered, just during this cataclysmic event that went through the first millennium, which is not spread out over 1,000 years through 3 separate events separated by 200 years each, but it's actually just one event that happened sometime between 70 AD and 300 AD. Because then we have record of the Byzantine Empire, or something like this 1,000-year reign of Christendom was established. But we don't actually know how long the time was between these times. We can't trust the dates that have been attributed to them by modern mainstream. There was a huge persecution of the Christians in the early first millennium. And it was happening, dated to many times. Obviously, we've got around 66 AD, then with the destruction of the temples of Nero, and then we had the Roman-Jewish wars, and then we had obviously the persecution of Christians throughout that time, slowly progressing to a crescendo in about 2084, and all that time period, that 250-year time period, that 200-year time period, may not be as long as we think it is, but it could have been a time where there was heavy Christian persecution, where the beast empire, run by many antichrist figures who were very much opposed to Christianity and wanted to re-establish worship of the old pagan gods, were forcing on the Christians of those times charagamas, stamps, official documents, marks of some kind that they were required to have, going in full blasphemy against their God, Jesus Christ, in order to survive within Roman civilization. We're not looking to the future for these things to happen. The early first millennium had plenty of good examples showing that it has